أجل فرجا.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum beste kijkers en welkom bij alweer een gloednieuwe aflevering van de Noor podcast. Vandaag hebben wij een zeer speciale internationale gast bij ons, dus vandaar dat ik de podcast zal voortzetten in het Engels. Assalamu alaikum dear viewers and welcome to a brand new episode of the Noor podcast. My name is Sophia Tahib, your host for today, and today we have with us a very special guest. Born in Lebanon, raised in America, and living in Lebanon now again with her husband and her little baby daughter. It's none other than Sister Zahra Makki. Welcome, sister.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I did not understand half the introduction, but it's a pleasure to be here.
No worries, I was just introducing. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Oh, thank you for having me, it's my pleasure.
It's our pleasure, really. This is your first time in the Netherlands, isn't it?
Yes, it's my first time ever, actually. Very, very, very beautiful land, very nice community, mashallah, and beautiful nature. So it's been a very nice experience overall.
Alhamdulillah, I was just about to ask you, how have you been enjoying your stay here in the Netherlands, but it's been all good up until now?
Alhamdulillah, yes, just seeing the views as much as we can, but it's a very short stay, so as much as possible, we're just making the most out of it, alhamdulillah.
Well, inshallah, we'll be able to welcome you many more times in the future. For today, we've had limited interaction up until this point,
yes.
Very limited. But for me, it feels like I've known you quite some time by following you in the online sphere and on social media. So for me, this is a very interesting, this is an opportunity I did not want to miss. But I can imagine we also have a lot of viewers today with us that might not know a lot about you.
Mm-hmm.
So shall we start with you telling a little bit more about yourself, starting with your upbringing in the United States?
Sure. So I was born in Lebanon. My parents came to the States when I was about 2 months. So I was a little infant. I spent most of my life in the States. Like everyone who grows up in Dearborn, that's usually where you stay. It's a very comfortable place. Everyone talks the same. We all dress. We all wear mostly we're all dressed modestly. We have similar upbringings. Our families are mostly Lebanese, so we have a very nice and tight-knit community. So alhamdulillah, I had an amazing experience with the community. People that appreciated going to the mosques, my time with the organizations there. I would do a lot of volunteer work since I was young. And my mom always urged us towards that. So she was very active in the community as well with the elders, with the majalis of Imam Hussein. She would really prioritize that. And so we kind of grew up in the environment of service. So since I was young, 12, 13, 14, 15, I was at the mosques, helping, volunteering my time as much as I could. I also was studying there for, I guess, all of my life until I moved to Lebanon. I was about 19 when I moved. Mm-hmm. I did an undergraduate degree in philosophy and biology. Before moving to Lebanon, actually, I was in nursing school.
Oh,
so
wow.
So I had ventured off into the healthcare field. I thought that I would pursue healthcare. I really loved studying the human body, biology, the mechanisms. I was very interested in that. So I thought healthcare was the area of life I wanted to do. Especially when you're an immigrant, child of an immigrant, you're always programmed to think the STEM sciences are really the avenues for success. So I also had that sort of indoctrination. Mm-hmm. So going to healthcare was, I feel like, something that I always wanted to do. Until I went into it, I had about 1.5 years left before I would graduate with my nursing degree. And I decided to leave and pursue philosophy. So that was kind of the beginning. After that, I moved to Lebanon and kind of my journey unfolded.
Wow. Well, first of all, alhamdulillah for having such a tight-knit community over there. Yes. I mean, here in the Netherlands, how most of us experience it here, it's less of a tight-knit community, especially when talking about the Shia community over here. Mm-hmm. But can you take us through the journey of how you came to study philosophy? Mm-hmm. Because to give a little bit background information on myself, I studied psychology, and when I made that decision and told the people around me, my family members about it, they didn't understand. As you said, that indoctrination of going into the healthcare, the field of healthcare, becoming a doctor, it was really indoctrinated within our family, within our circles as well. So how did you make that decision, and how did it go when you told your friends and family members about it?
Well, since I was a kid, I was very good at science. I was very good at biology, and like we said, you have this indoctrination to go into the STEM fields as this avenue of success, making your parents proud. So I never actually was presented with the question of, what do you want to do? It was just, hey, listen, you're very good at this. Why don't you do it for a living? It's something that's very strong and successful. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't realize is that just because you're very good at something, it doesn't mean you have to pursue it. And we conflate that very often, because sometimes I might be very great at something, getting great grades about something, but it doesn't mean that's the way of life I want to pursue, because your career really dictates the nature of your life. So for the longest time, I took it for granted that yes, okay, of course I'm going to go into the sciences. Of course I'm going to, become a nurse or a doctor. That was something that was just taken for granted. I didn't think twice about. But I think throughout my journey, especially when I was 15, 16, 17, and I really empathize with 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, because it's the hardest time, honestly. You're going between these emotional changes, these logical, rational changes. You're forced into making very difficult decisions about your life. At 16, 17, you have to decide how you're going to live for the rest of your life, what career you're pursuing. It's a lot of pressure. And then, you're trying to consolidate your identities. West, what am I? Lebanese, am I Muslim, am I Western? What does it all mean? It's a very difficult time. And so at that time, I was really engrossed in the questions of meaning. Like, how do we find meaning in suffering? How do we find meaning in pain? And I was surrounded by someone that was going through a very traumatic experience at the time. And I was just trying to process where God stands in all of this. So that was the beginning of these very deep questions about how do we talk about suffering and talk about religion and talk about life and try to find meaning in all of this. So I would kind of go on these journeys. I remember I went on Amazon and I ordered these philosophy books that I did not understand a word of. I still remember I had the book right here and the dictionary right here, and I was like, what is ontology? What is cosmology? What do these words mean? So I wasn't very good at it, but I was reading into it and I was trying to find meaning. I was very interested in the intersection of religion and, suffering, meaning, and purpose in this life. Like, how do we find that intersection? That was the beginning. So when I was studying biology in university, I was also doing a minor in philosophy. That was the first introduction to my, philosophy inclination. So at that time, it didn't seem like anything that could lead to anything else, right? So I was there. I was doing nursing. I got into nursing school, and I remember all my friends were celebrating so much because it was an expedited program, an amazing program. So when they got accepted, they were so happy. And I was just like, I'm just going through the motions. Yeah, this was just what I was planning on doing all along. Mm-hmm. I had a year and a half left, and an RN degree is a really great degree, registered nurse. It's a great degree. It has a lot of opportunities. You can always climb the ladder if you wanted to get your master's, open up opportunities. So it made a lot of sense. To my family, it made perfect sense. But with a year and a half left, I actually decided to leave and pursue philosophy full-time as a way of life, academia, teaching, research, giving my life to this area that had literally enchanted me at that point. So I was faced with a bit of a difficult decision. I remember I was sitting in the car, it was nighttime, and I looked in the sky and I'm like, what am I gonna do? Do I continue down this nursing route? I'm almost done. Or do I just leave it all behind? And some people would say, finish. Just finish and then do it. Mm-hmm. That's what my parents were trying to tell me. They were trying to convince me, Zahra, just get the degree and then do the philosophy, do the hobby, right? Yes. Then pursue it. And you know what? That might be a good idea for some people. Get the degree and then pursue. But I knew myself. I knew if I offered myself that security, I now have that degree, I knew I wouldn't stop there. I knew I was going to go for the master's. I was going to climb the corporate ladder, try to get more opportunities, a greater pay, just expand my opportunities. I knew it wasn't going to stop. Mm-hmm. So I knew in order to pursue philosophy, the intersection between philosophy, Islam, meaning, I had to take out the security from under my feet. Mm-hmm. Or otherwise I would never pursue it. So I had that much awareness that if I continue down this route and I get the degree, I will feel too comfortable to choose to let it go and then go back to school and not have a paying job and start from zero, for example. Mm-hmm. So I decided, you know what, Mama, Baba, I have to do this for me. And that's how it started. I submitted my leave. My advisor called me. She was shocked. And I was like, I have to do this for me. And that's how I did. I applied to the American University of Beirut to transfer over and continue my philosophical studies there. And from then I did my undergrad, and then I went on to do my master's as well.
Wow. I mean, wow is the first word that comes to mind listening to your story here. I think you've been a philosopher at heart from such a young age, reflecting, knowing yourself, finding out who you are, and then eventually making that step. So what was the reaction of your parents and your friends and family members when you eventually told them that you not only wanted to switch your career, your studies, but then also move to Lebanon?
It wasn't a very positive reaction, right? Because my move into Lebanon to continue this coincided with also marrying, very young, my husband at the time. And, young marriage wasn't something that's very, it's not very encouraged in certain households. It might be seen as an obstacle to leading a life of knowledge or a life rather of success in the eyes of people. So, of course, my family, my close ones had a lot of concerns. I think I had to realize that at one point you have to take responsibility for your life. No one is going to live the repercussions of your actions but you, not even your parents. So I think I felt the weight of responsibility for taking charge of my life. And I had to go through with it. I knew what I wanted to pursue, and I knew I had to be uncomfortable to pursue it. Because really, you only grow when you're uncomfortable. When you put yourself in these uncomfortable discomfort zones, let's call them, when you push your boundary that far, you are bound to grow. And I encourage this to everyone. Travel, expand your horizons, be uncomfortable for a little while. Make the uncomfortable choice if it's the right choice. And for me, it was the right choice. But, the way they received it was, you're going backwards, Zahra. We came here to give you guys a better life.
Yes.
And you're willing to go back. So for them, they were like, you're doing it the other way around. Right? You're undoing everything we've done. But alhamdulillah, I'm personally not comfortable of taking any action in my life without my parents being 100% on board because of the tawfiq. I would never want to upset them. So, of course, at the end of the day, they trusted me. They trusted my awareness. I was very aware of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
I think that maturity reassured them. From a young age, I tried my best to be very aware and grounded. So that reassured them that, listen, what Zahra's going to do, we have to trust that she's going to do it. Because not only was I moving to Lebanon to pursue these studies, I was living in the village, not in the city. So I was studying, my first semester, I was spending about 5 hours on the road driving to get to my classes and get back home. And they all told me, it's not going to happen. You're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. I would get phone calls, people, my close ones, my family. It's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. I tell them, listen, it's going to happen. I have conviction. I have belief. I'm going to follow through with this. Sure enough, it was very hard. But I would wake up, I remember, 4:30 in the morning, pray Fajr, get dressed, get my lunchbox ready, put on all these bags to go drive down, get stuck in traffic. You're talking 2 hours to 2 hours and a half because it was prime time when I was on the road. I would leave, 7 a.m. I'd be in the greatest city traffic for an hour, hour and a half. You're just inching your car forward. And then I would finish my classes at 4:45 p.m. So 5 p.m. in the heart of the city, getting back home, again, a lot of traffic. And I did that for 5 years.
MashaAllah.
Right, for my undergrad and my master's. But when they saw the work and they saw the grit, they became proud, First it's like they push against you, but then you show that belief and you follow through with it, and then they're like, oh, that's my daughter, look what she's doing. It's like, thank you, I'm happy, you're happy, that's all that matters.
MashaAllah. What was it at these points in your life where you didn't feel any support or less support? What was it that drove you? Where did you draw strength from, or what did you draw strength from?
Listen, I think everything that we pursue in life, if it doesn't go back to the pursuit of knowledge, like true knowledge, inner knowledge, I don't find much pleasure in it. So like even when you're traveling, even when I go on, any holiday, I have my book, I have my journal. I love to see meaning in everything. And I think everyone has the capacity to try to see meaning in everything. For me, what drove me, I think, was I felt like everyone else led a life of mediocrity. And I thought, is this really... Because you said something like you were always a philosopher at heart earlier. But I believe we're all kind of philosophers at heart. You meet people with these astounding questions and these astounding dreams that over time just become quieter and quieter and silenced and silenced. And I thought, I'm so scared I'm going to go down that route, because we don't choose that route. We just kind of make these small choices in our life that lead us to an area where we're not curious about life anymore. Mm-hmm. We're not inspired. We're not enchanted. And I thought, how can I keep the magic alive? And I thought, I have to be uncomfortable for a long time in order to contend with meaning. Because listen, when you're doing everything the way everyone wants you to do it, and everyone's clapping for you and everyone's happy for you, there's not much growth there. Even within yourself, you're not too happy. You're looking for something deeper, always looking for something deeper. I think that's the mark of insan. We're always looking for something deeper. But when you do something that maybe it's unconventional to people, but it's the right choice, even if it's uncomfortable, that's when you really know yourself, like that's when you really go inwards and you have that journey. I think we all need to have that journey. It can be a physical journey of hijrah, of return. It can be an internal journey, where you're going on it and you're having this paradigm where wherever you go, you're trying to abstract meaning. So for me, knowledge and thought and contemplation, that was always everything. I was really inspired by Henry David Thoreau, by Emerson, these writers, these people that decided that the conventional way of society wasn't for them. And so they lived life amongst nature and they wrote their reflections and their contemplations. And I was like, I would love to live a life like that. Mm-hmm. So I guess reading these authors from a young age, I read a lot of Sayyid Hussein Nasr when I was 15, 16. He had a big impact on my life as well. So I would say these three people really informed my vision of what I wanted to see in the world and the kind of awareness I wanted to generate.
Yeah, wow. Again, it's really a philosopher at heart and soul. That's what I'm hearing from listening to your story. So what you said, growth and development, it's right there outside of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And what you did is looking at how other people were living their lives and contemplating, even for a second, that this is the road I will be going down to as well. Unless I make the active choice, I actively reflect and make the decision of stepping outside of that comfort zone and seeking meaning, seeking knowledge. Yeah. Wow. Again, wow.
That's not that wow. You're flattering me. Thank you. I feel like we're all on similar journeys like this. Mm-hmm. Right? We're all that. There was Robert Frost's poem, I believe, 2 roads diverged in yellow wood, and I chose the one less traveled by. I had that as my, the cover photo on your Facebook. I had that when I was 15, 16, 17. So I was contending with these 2 roads diverged in wood, which when you're at a crossroad and you're choosing which path is right. And I'm not saying the conventional path is wrong. I'm saying that whatever you choose, don't let comfort be the guide. Don't let that be the qualifier for a good life. Because, first of all, it never is. You're never going to be satisfied. And second of all, this journey of inner knowledge, all the poets, the best poetry, the best writing, when does it come? When you're heartbroken, right? When you're having these issues, when you're contending with things that are deep or meaningful to you. So sometimes if you're not throwing yourself out in the deep end, you're never going to have that depth. Mm-hmm. You see?
Yes.
So sometimes you have to actively throw yourself out in the deep end. This is like making big decisions in your life. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's like, do I want to live here? Like a lot of people are making a lot more conscious decisions about where they live, for example. Mm-hmm. I'm talking to a lot of people back in Dearborn, and their parents came, they built, these kids came, they became mothers, they have kids now. They're thinking, am I staying in this area? Am I staying in this land? Is that something I want? We're making these core active decisions, not just for ourselves. We're making it for generations to come. We have a responsibility. When you look at it like that, comfort is not the qualifier for whether, for example, you live the rest of your life in America or not, or wherever. It has to be something deeper. It has to be a moral compass. It has to be a way of life that you're seeking out. You have to seek it out. No one's going to do it for you, right? We sit in lectures. I would be at every lecture. I would be listening intently, but I realized at one point, you have to go from listening to doing to becoming to acting. So it's not just making these huge decisions. Sometimes it's just throw yourself in uncomfortable positions, meaning go to the gym. Do the uncomfortable stuff. That's the only way growth happens. The more you get used to it, running the extra mile, lifting the extra weight, whatever it is, making that core decision, waking up that certain time, I think the more vast your life becomes. vast of experience, wholeness, because it's not just happiness. You're experiencing a vast array of emotions, and you're actively participating in this.
The keyword being actively, yeah. So it's not only
It's not
about
passive.
exactly that. It's not only about stepping outside of your comfort zone. What I'm hearing from you, it's also doing it actively, having some introspection. What am I doing? Where do I want to go? What do I want to seek and have in life? And then actively stepping outside of your comfort zone.
Possible.
Yeah, and know thyself is not something which is only taught within Western philosophy, but also something that our deen, Islam, encourages us to do.
Yes.
And following that path, I'm very interested in how you experienced the difference between studying in the States and studying philosophy in Lebanon.
So I had a very interesting experience. Alhamdulillah, I went to a very, very great university in Lebanon. I had an amazing experience there in so many ways. The student to professor ratio was quite small, especially for my department, which was the philosophy department, and it was such few students. So we got to really pick at our professors' brains, have very close connections with the network of professors that were there, and develop friendships with these professors that were teaching us and showing us their way of being, their way of doing, their way of acting and speaking. So just plainly, let's just talk very plainly, it's a lot more rigorous in Lebanon, extremely rigorous. Whereas in the States, I would study maybe the night before an exam and I would ace the exam very easily. In this university, you could study and know the book by heart, and I will guarantee you will not get higher than a 90. And our professors are very clear about their grading policy. So it's a lot more rigorous and it really pushes you. So that first year, and I'm not saying this was a good thing, but I had no social life. My life consisted of classes, going back home and studying. It was very, very, very difficult in the beginning. I had to, I want to be very clear. I wasn't the best at philosophy when I pursued this. I had a lot of questions, and that's really how I got into this field. But I was that student sitting in the beginning row of every class, writing notes nonstop, while my friend was on their phone playing games, and they were doing great on their exams, and I was struggling. I was that student. I was a student that would go to every office hour, record the office hour, and ask my professor the questions because I was baffled by this new world, because philosophy is a new language entirely. It's a new way of seeing things. So for example, the simplest questions like contrast, for example, the word contrast. I used to always think contrast was between things that are total opposites, for example, black and white. But sometimes the professor would use the word contrast to talk about the cloud and the wall. I'd be like, what? That's not how I'm used to using contrast. So there's this definitions that you're going through. I would have the dictionary literally like defining the simplest words for me, because philosophy teaches you to be precise and concise with language. That was one of the most amazing, mind-blowing things that come with philosophy, is the precision with language that feeds into how you think as well. Because when you know how to speak clearly, concisely, using the right words, you know how to think a lot more clearly as well. So that when someone says, why are you angry? You say, listen, I'm not actually angry. I'm actually experiencing something a bit more nuanced here. I'm experiencing insecurity. I'm experiencing vulnerability. I'm experiencing something that's frustrated, for example. Yeah. This is how precision with language can actually inform your understanding of self. So that was amazing. On the other side, I have to say, a lot of times, maybe all the times that I was studying philosophy, I was studying under professors that didn't believe in a religion, were either atheist or agnostic themselves. And so that was a heavy burden to carry, because you're walking into classrooms, speaking with people, interacting with people that had no belief, and perhaps saw belief as an obstacle to being open-minded and engaging with real ideas. Right? To maintain any objective truth, to say even truth, is a bit of a taboo. Who said? It's quite relative, it's subjective. Yes. So this was kind of the aura that I was getting. It was like a post-truth world that I was trying to navigate. And I remember I had a professor in my undergrad. I took several courses with this professor. He was a great professor. And I thought he was Muslim by origin, but he was no longer a believer himself. And I remember by the end of my program, it was 2 years later, I had about 4 courses with him each semester, across the semesters. I asked if he would do a tutorial, which was a one-on-one tutorial course that would replace a general classroom setting. So you would be studying something under this professor one-on-one. And it was because this person had expertise in Ibn Sina, we did Ibn Sina's Shifa together that semester. So this professor would see me walk into the classrooms over the years, and I would be carrying books by Mutahari and, Allamat al-Tabai, and, I would be reading Sayyid Hussein Nasr, and he was aware of these names. He wouldn't make any comments. But during this one-on-one tutorial, I started to get to know a little bit about his moral compass, and he started to speak a bit more regarding my moral compass. And then at the end of the tutorial, I was applying for my master's at the same institution, and I asked, is it possible for you to write me a master's recommendation letter? And this was a great professor. It would have been really great to get a letter from him, and he was very happy too. But he said something. He did a big disclaimer. He said, listen, you're studying philosophy, great. Make sure you hold on to what you have. He's talking about hijab. He's talking about belief. He's talking about religion. These scholars that I'm reading, I could tell there was a lot of pain masked behind that comment. It seems as if he had lost something on the way. And in this professor's office, you would see in the very distance, under dust, all the way up high back, a little sign that says, Ya Ali ibn Musa Rida. So I could see in this professor, although there was no belief, although this was someone that drank and just lived a very normal lifestyle. There was no belief, let alone practice. There was something that they were trying to hold on to that they had long lost. And I was like, okay. I figured, let me push him a little bit. Let me ask him some questions, because he's very private, very stern, just very distant, just khalas. So I was like, what are your beliefs? What are your truths? You're telling me to hold on to mine. And he said, listen, you're going into the belly of the beast now. When you're going into an atheistic philosophy, he said, you're going into the belly of the beast, and these places have a very good way of breaking you apart. Breaking your belief, breaking everything you hold on to. But they don't teach you how to put yourself back together. And I realized this was probably his experience, someone that was fragmented, and this is literally the word he used. But he wouldn't say I. He would just speak about this fragmentation of self that would happen, where the self is left in pieces. Doubt, nihilism. And he said every morning, what's my truth? He said every morning when I sit with my coffee, I have to recollect what is meaningful, what is truthful, and what is not. And I thought, I don't want to go into too much details about this professor, but this professor is someone very up there. Very up there. We're talking Harvard. We're talking like someone who's very, very informed. We're not talking anyone. So to hear that and see that this was the experience of someone I very much looked up to in terms of their academic success, but to realize internally they weren't really okay. So philosophy, it was very much so. You're contending with ideas, doubts, people that are going through doubts a lot. But if you're not careful, the people around you, not the study itself, can push you towards nihilism and skepticism unnecessarily, because they see that as a mark of an open mind. The more open your mind is, the less inclined you are towards truth.
Well, we in Islam believe in something completely different. How do those two worlds intersect for you, Islam and philosophy? Being a Muslim yourself, having studied philosophy, and hearing such comments from professors.
Listen, Islam is very much an intellectual tradition. It's not just a lot of people don't realize, but Islam and the mind go hand in hand. Al-aql and Islam, they're not to be separated. They go hand in hand. Our tradition is so rich. And so even in my course of studies, you're studying people like Hume, people with a lot of doubts, skeptic people. And because my department itself was a very, non-belief oriented department, you're also surrounded by this aura of non-truth. In fact, most of the people that went to this department renounced faith as well, because this is the atmosphere. My experience that I've realized, and I'm so grateful for our Shia tradition for, is that there was no question. So sometimes you'd go into a class, questions would pop up because you talk about God and existence, evil, suffering. And yes, I would have a question. a question would pop out in terms of Islam. How do I reconcile this with Islam? Or what does Islam have to say about this? Or does Islam even say anything at all? But I never panicked. And that's the difference. I never had this panic or this doubt in Islam, because I knew, despite any question that would come up, there's an answer to be found in our tradition. Our tradition, our Shia tradition, does not shy away from the intellect. Our Sunni brothers, they're not so keen on philosophy, right? But Shia Islam, it doesn't say don't ask, it says ask. Your aqidah is your responsibility. You cannot get your aqaid, your belief system, from your marja'. Your marja' is only for fiqh. It's for the jurisprudential element, that's it. But your system of belief, what you see the world to be, how you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's your responsibility to build as a Muslim. And our Shia tradition doesn't shy away from any question. Ask. Proof for God's existence, we have. What else do you have questions about? Meaning, suffering, the problem of evil, ask. We have answers to this. So alhamdulillah, our scholars have done, the Shia tradition and the Shia scholars have done a lot. They contributed a lot in terms of philosophy, and they're continuing this tradition. So any time I had a question, I'd go and I'd ask, and it was okay. You know, I believe that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, لا يعبد الله بشيء أفضل من العقل. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not worshipped through anything greater than the intellect. So let's not separate the two. It's very holistic. So as you're intellectually interacting with this tradition, in fact, your faith deepens when you intellectually interact with it. You're putting things apart so you can put them back together even stronger. So for me, it has been very enlightening. However, if you're not someone, for example, if you're someone that's inclined to doubt, but you're not someone that can look for answers, I say don't go into this field. Because doubting is easy. It's so easy to break someone apart. It's so easy to pick apart someone's faith. Oh, you believe this, you believe that, but what about... So easy to pick them apart. But building is hard. Putting something together is very hard. People very easily destroy. They wreak havoc on the person's world, internally, externally. But to build is hard. So if you're not willing to build, all you're willing to do is cast doubt and question, I say you haven't done your due diligence, step back. This is not your place, it's going to hurt you more than it's going to benefit you. Well, because alhamdulillah, I had the hawza, I had always something to go back to, I had the resources to ask, there was no reason to panic. I think as Shias, we have no reason to panic. Our tradition offers us everything. So whatever question you have, we have answers, inshallah.
We have answers. Ask. Feel free to ask.
Yes.
You should take the responsibility to ask.
Yes.
And that's what I love about our religion, while at the same time, if you would look at our communities and our cultures, especially speaking from my own personal experiences, we're not always encouraged to ask. That's, again, what I love about our religion. Our aql is our greatest asset, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And we are encouraged to use it and to keep asking. I love how you said philosophy and Islam in that way go really hand in hand. And if you are not willing to, after you've broken everything apart and yourself apart, you've picked everything apart, you're not able to put it back together, don't go into this field.
Yes.
I relate to that on a really personal level, because I've followed some philosophy courses as well in high school, where we had this teacher who was anti-religion, wouldn't speak too much about it on a personal level, but you knew from everything he said. And he would encourage us to ask and to doubt. And he would say, there is no truth. There is only a personal truth, but you will not be able to prove it. He was one of those philosophers. And I remember him asking us to write an essay on how do you see the truth and how would you prove your truth to be the one and only truth. I, being a Muslim, I chose Plato's allegory of the cave. And I said, that speaks to me and what I've learned within religious courses as well, or in the mosque. And I remember him saying, yeah, well, how can you prove this? How would you go about proving it? And at that age, I must say, now that I know myself a bit better, I know that that was not the right age for me to be following such a course.
I mean, absolutely. I think it's very unfair to him for him to put the burden of proof on you. I mean, his statement itself, there is no truth. How is that? How can I verify that if there's no truth?
How can you prove that?
How can you prove that? If there's no truth, then even your statement itself is relative and subjective to yourself. So don't impose that upon me. That's the problem. It's a lot of faulty logic. And I found again and again, because, you know, in my course of my own studies, I was at the time the only person that wore a headscarf in the department. And as a student, the other students would be like, okay, I had a really good relationship with other students, but we would have, these discussions tattering on debates, and they'd be like, but you, and I'd be like, but you. And so we had this friendly like discussion always ongoing. But because I had such a long time with this cohort of students, about 4 or 5 years down the line, these same people that renounced any blueprint for how they ought to live according to truth and objectivity, themselves 4 or 5 years later would come and speak to me and open up. On various occasions they would say, I'm not doing too well, I'm suffering, I'm depressed, I feel very nihilistic. They're like, what's the meaning of all this? So subhanAllah, if anything at all, if all I had to take away is your way of life and your way of untruth, I look at what that brought you, and I look at what my way of life has brought me. Because when I put my head on the pillow at night, I'm not doubting with questions of nihilism, and there's nothing matters, and it's all for nothing, and this life is meaningless, and then you go back and it's as if you never were, and you're just blackness after death. I don't have that. I look at your tradition, your people, and what they have to contend with, and I look at my people and my saints and what they go through and the way they live and the peace that they inherently have, their aura, and I say, listen, if I knew nothing more but just these two comparisons, I am very well aware that this way of life is definitely the truth. So they'd open up with these questions, these problems, with this distress that they have. And I say, alhamdulillah, our tradition offers us aql, it offers us an intellectual, it also offers us faith and symbols and metaphor. And we get to merge the two, and we have a blueprint for how to live, right? You either follow a prophet or you become one. And a lot of people, when they become their own prophet, they suffer because they don't know how to adjudicate between good and bad and right and wrong, and it's just an never-ending spiral. That's not a life, in my opinion. That's not a life worth living.
We have, like you said, we have the best examples to live by. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the best examples to live by. So again, either follow a prophet or become a prophet. And as we see in daily life, that's not a way of life that most people can do.
Yeah, I mean, the Holy Quran is replete with verses that say, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٌ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. So this emphasis on, aql is not just mathematical deductions. Aql is to engage in deep thought and contemplation. A lot of Muslims, unfortunately, they don't do that. When you have traditions that say an hour of reflection is better than 70 years of worship, and then some traditions say even more, why? True reflection. Muslims don't even know how to talk about their religion because they haven't really thought about it. I'm not saying go to a lecture and write. I'm saying think, sit down, 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, sit in nature, sit by yourself, think. Being, religion, Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tradition, think, go thought to thought, think deeply about this life. And you're going to come up with plethora of ideas. Start to engage with your tradition in this way. Become a thinker, interact with this world around you. These are all ayat, these are signs. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, these are all signs, take them as signs. Think, reflect, contemplate. Let that be something that's part of you. Then when you can think like that, you can speak more freely. You can speak about the faith. You can, discuss the faith. You can pinpoint your questions. A lot of Muslims are coming out with doubts. They're having trouble holding on to the faith. And I understand why. And I understand that everything around us is pulling us away from anything sacred. Forget Islam only. Religion itself is under attack. Anything sacred is under attack. Everyone's being pulled away from that. And I always say that the only thing left is you, your heart, your mind. You have to stay strong. You can't let them fragment you. And the problem is that because we don't think too much about religion, we confuse ignorance with doubt. So for example, we won't have all of the knowledge about how to stay firm in our religion. And so we start to have the experience of this state as doubt, but that's not doubt. You don't know, you're ignorant, that's all it is. Can you say, here I'm doubtful, here I'm ignorant? Can you at least make that difference? Because we're not people that engage with thought and actually logically try to navigate some of the things that we go through, we mistake ignorance to be doubt. That's not doubt. You just need to know more, ask the right questions. It's not just enough to ask. Interact with your faith in that way.
So to get back to that really good point you made, the difference between doubt and ignorance would be to have more knowledge on the topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you said before is the ages of 16 to 18 really a fragile period in your lifetime where you're forming an identity and at the same time having a lot of doubts. And we as Muslims, we as human beings have this huge responsibility of asking the questions, of doubting, but at the same time reaching those answers and reaching the truth which Allah has stated for us, but still asks of us to take the responsibility to get there. For those people in that phase of their life, what advice would you give them? How to start this process of reflection and self-development?
So I want to say one thing before I jump. Asking is different to doubting. So in the experience of the years I studied and I'm studying currently, I don't go through doubt. I go through certain questions I have. Doubt is a difference. When you have doubt, you're casting a judgment. When you have a question, you just don't know. And that's very different. It's very vast. When you're asking a question, you're professing your ignorance. When you're having doubt, you're ascertaining or making a judgment about the untruth of something or the possible untruth of something, you see? So it's okay to ask. Be careful of doubt, because doubt can cripple you away bit by bit. Ask. If you have a question, if you're not sure about something, you're experiencing that uncertainty, ask. Don't judge yourself as someone that's doubting or skeptical of the faith. Ask for people that are 16, 17, 18. First of all, I understand it's very hard, and I empathize greatly. It's a very hard time in life. Everyone is really struggling, and I get it. I would say, first of all, differentiate between your love of dunya and your issues with your questions, rather, about the faith. Because sometimes our doubts about faith is actually it's masqueraded, or at the core of it is just actually love of dunya, of wanting the freedom to do as your nafs pleases. And especially at that age, 16, 17, 18, you're interacting with dunya. Maybe your logic, your rationale, it's still in the works, it's still being developed. So you're really at the sway of your hormones and your emotions. So that's how you're wanting to interact with the world. So sometimes we're uncomfortable, we have a question, we let or use or weaponize that question against ourselves to give us or grant us the freedom to not pray every day. Why, مثلا, the infamous question, why should I pray in this way where I do wudu and I stand in prayer 5 times a day when I feel closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in nature? Why can't I just, opt for that? For example, a lot of people ask that, and that's a good question. Well, we can talk about that. Mm-hmm. However, just because you have this question that you see to be a very good question, doesn't mean you stop praying 5 times a day. Okay? It doesn't mean that you opt for the comfort of not committing to the faith because you don't have all of the answers. And that's what I would strongly advise, is don't let hubb dunya, don't let love of dunya be the thing that makes you renounce your commitment to your faith. Ask the questions and be patient. Don't feel so entitled to have these instant answers. For anything worthwhile, there has to be patience. You have to wait. You have to work towards actually arriving at the answer. And I think we can be a bit too lazy. When it comes to everything worldly, we're so on point with the questions, advisor to advisor, mentor to mentor, workshop to workshop. But when we have doubts about the faith, sometimes we use that as a license to just start to get a bit lazy with our spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. And that's when I say, listen, be careful, guys. It's not worth it. We take for granted too much the ability to do tawbah and repent. You never know when your time is going to come. And not just that. Sometimes you say, listen, it's just a small thing that I'm doing, small sin. It's okay. I'll come back when I'm a bit older, a bit more grounded. I'll stop doing this. But you got to be really careful. Like, one sin brings about another, to the point where one point you're going to reach a point where you think, I don't even want to go back to the way I was in terms of being religiously committed. And that old you thought that you wouldn't ever get to that point where you would make that judgment. So the more you kind of sway, the more you yourself become incapable of recommitting to the spiritual practice. So be careful with how much room you give yourself. Ask, invest in the answers, and don't fall for the sparkle and the glam of what dunya appears to be, because a lot of these people that you're trying to live like, wallah, they're not happy within themselves. Mm-hmm. Peace is really the way.
Yeah. So to reiterate for those wanting to start this process, or maybe within this process, is to keep asking questions. and being mindful that there's a difference between asking questions and doubting, like you said. Ask questions and be patient.
Yes.
Instead of postponing the tawbah for the sin, postpone maybe not having those answers immediately. So maybe I did get an answer, but I don't understand. Leave it for a later phase in your life. Maybe you'll understand then. But have that patience that it will come. You will get those answers as long as you hold on to the practice of what Islam, what Allah has dictated for us, has asked for us.
Unfortunately, a lot of us, when it comes to Islam, have a lot of unlearning to do. We have to unlearn a lot. And maybe when you're going through that phase, the way you have been taught Islam itself is not correct. A lot of us as Muslims have a journey to go on our own to arrive at the true Islam. Yani, alhamdulillah, we get some good stuff from the way we were brought up, from the culture that we were brought up upon. But sometimes there's a lot that goes missing. We start to see Islam as this robotic way of just do this, do that, do this, do that. Halal, haram. And although jurisprudence is extremely important because it gives us the blueprint for our life, Islam is even vaster than that. There's jurisprudence, but there's so much more, right? And I think we limit the reach of Islam to just this superficial outward body. But if you give the deen a chance to really know, learn, read, open your horizons, know what Islam says, you'll realize it's not just a do and a don't, it's a way of being. It's a way of interacting with the universe and with the self. And it's the most beautiful way of interacting with the universe and the self.
SubhanAllah, it really is. I think a factor that really plays a big role in this unlearning or having to unlearn a lot of the things that we have learned and going back to what is Islam. It's not only fiqh, so the jurisprudence, it's a lot more than that. There's more beauty in it. I think a big factor that plays a role in here is the fact that a lot of us who live here in the West, we get a lot of Western ideals, the things that we learn in school, the philosophy courses and the history courses, but also having to do with ethics. It's all the Western ideal, the Western values. And what do we learn when we go to the mosque? A lot of what is haram and what is halal. What are you supposed to do? What can you do? And what are you not allowed to do? So speaking from personal experiences, I started seeing those things as two separate worlds. But the advice that we're giving right now, that you're giving right now, is no, Islam is not just fiqh. It's a lot more, there's a lot more beauty to it. So start reading, learning, asking questions, and merge the two worlds.
This compartmentalization, I'd like to call it, of self, this fragmentation of self, really going back to this issue of fragmented, where in my workspace I am someone, in my home I am someone else, in the mosque I am a third kind of person, is a type of fragmentation. And so like recollection in Plato, we have a part in recollecting the pieces of ourselves and becoming whole again, this oneness of self that we have to internalize. And part of that is harmonizing all of the facets of the self into this one entity, this one being, right? Tawheed. How do you mirror Tawheed within the self? Professing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as one, but also how do I harmonize the parts of myself and become one as well? Because if I'm living all of these vast identities that I wish they were complementary, a lot of times they're contradictory, then I feel in myself I'm constantly going through an inner battle. And this is the experience of most Muslims in the West, is that they have this constant battle of harmonizing the different facets in my life. And, at work I'm this person who I don't know how I mix around, how I shake hands, how I interact, and then at home, and then when I stand on my prayer mat, I'm expected to be something else. And then how do I merge the worlds? And this idea is a lot of it has to do with how we've compartmentalized our faith and seen it as just a do and a don't. People are perfectly happy for you to practice your faith as long as you don't do it in front of them. Right? You listen. Fast, pray, just do it in your home. I'm happy for you to do it in your home. But to internalize and manifest Islam as a way of being, that's when it becomes a question mark. But because our aqa'id, our worldview, our foundation is the foundation of our fiqh, it's the foundation of how we do and we don't, then we have to really put in our time and resources into understanding the aqa'id and the ethics. And then at the very top, you get the fiqh, the jurisprudence. This blueprint for how we should and shouldn't live is a culmination of a whole tradition. of a way of seeing things, of a perception, of a worldview, of a lens towards dunya and a lens towards akhirah, right? There's so much that precedes the haram and the halal in terms of ideology. But in the process, submission is important. I think we say the language of the time, the language of the age has a big part to play in this dynamic of submission to the faith. I will only submit when I have all of the answers, masalan, is a very entitled way of thinking, because at the center of that isn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's the self. So then what are you really worshipping? إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا. The people who say, our Lord is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then, not just say, don't just profess, you remain steadfast. I made a decision, this is the way I'm going to live. This is the thing, we make a decision and we go back on it. Make it go back. No. Say Rabbuna Allah and then have steadfastness. Stay on that path. But we're always tattering. The language of the age is a very loaded language. Submission itself is seen as a derogatory term. When submission has always been, when you're submitting to something noble or loyal, that's actually seen as a sign of nobility itself. But because submission, power dynamics, the way we see power in this time is something very entitled and as though it's something hierarchical, we have an issue with the word submission. So I will only follow religion insofar as it feels good, as it gives me the spiritual high. Masalan. Then who are you following? The feeling, the self, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And this is the biggest issue right now, is we come with these presuppositions, this language, and we say, listen, I'm being very objective here. I'm being very objective here, but the language that you're using itself is very loaded, right? When you have an issue, masalan, with the word patriarchy. Why? People get baffled. What do you mean why? Of course, patriarchy is bad. Why? Why is patriarchy in the family bad? And then they actually have to think about it and they realize, hey, maybe I made some assumptions about, because it makes women less. Why? Why is leadership in your position or your eyes a status symbol? When in our tradition, leadership itself was something that wasn't sought in and of itself. Why do you feel like if someone is a leader, they're better? Masalan. Why is that your value? Why is that the way in which you assign value to things? It gets a bit scary there. Because you never think to ask these questions, right? Sayyid Khamenei, when he was given the Wilayat al-Faqih, he cried, he didn't want it. Leadership was never something that our leaders were like, I really want to be, no. So then why is it that leadership is such an amazing thing for us, that everyone, I want to be the leader, I want to be the one that's followed. So why is patriarchy such a bad word? It's because we're making certain assumptions about value itself that we don't question. And that's part of the language of the age. You're coming with these loaded terms that have only become loaded in the past 1 or 2 centuries, and you're imposing them on a lifelong tradition that has been for 1400 years, and you're imposing this new loaded language on it and using it to judge that tradition. Now I'm saying step back, look at the word itself, deconstruct it, and tell me this discomfort that you feel with the word. What kind of value system do you have within yourself that's making you uncomfortable to contend with this word? And let's talk about that. That's when the real magic happens. It's once you become self-aware about the system of value you've internalized without even realizing, without even saying, okay, I'll take the system of value. This is what we're dealing with here in the West. So I think having this awareness is a good start, because we have a lot of internal crisis with Islam. And a lot of it is coming from assumptions that we are taking to be things that we don't even take as assumptions. They're just always there in the background. But we operate from that framework and we cause a lot of problems with ourselves. Let's start to question the paradigm a little bit. Let's get uncomfortable.
Let's get uncomfortable. I think we should make that a really big slogan. Everyone start asking questions, start getting out of that comfort zone, and stop being in that autopilot mode. Because that's what's happening when you're not asking questions. You're making assumptions, you're taking things at face value. This is the truth, this is it, patriarchy is bad. While if you would start asking the right questions and opening up those dialogues like we're doing right now, you would start to realize, like you said, patriarchy having a negative value or a very loaded term. It's something from the past 2 decades, or what is it that we're even talking about? Start asking the right questions. I love that, really, and I think a lot of people should be taking that advice in whatever area in their lives. Yeah.
Thank you. I think as men, we have to shift the narrative about how it feels to practice religion. And we have to realize that sometimes it's going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the faith itself. And that jihad al-nafs, this fight against the self, was something that has always been embedded and highlighted in our tradition. So a lot of times we think, but if I'm practicing, this should always feel good. First of all, if you're practicing, the practice part might feel very hard. But in fact, that struggle is what's curating and refining the nafs. That's what's actually breeding a lot of peace and sakina. So if you look at the lives of our scholars, look at just their history, how they lived. They were very, very difficult. They were replete with hardships, replete. Financial hardships, physical hardships, health hardships, familial hardships. And they went through the path, but they were at peace. So sometimes we can't get past how uncomfortable sometimes it might feel to practice something. So for example, if I don't feel absolutely comfortable with wearing that scarf, then I should take it off. When Islam says, no, push through the discomfort, it's good for you. Believe me, pushing through is an element of self-refinement. I mentioned this a lot. The Holy Prophet, when he came back from the war with all of these soldiers, and they were tired and they were exhausted. Imagine war, battle, you've lost people, you're injured, you're bloodied. And he says, welcome to the people that have completed the smaller jihad, the minor jihad. Now we have to complete the bigger jihad, the greater jihad. And imagine you're tired, you're exhausted, and you're thinking, what do you mean the greater jihad? There's a greater jihad. And he says, yes, the jihad of the self. The greatest enemy is not outside, it's within. Okay. So if we're also not embedding that into our spiritual practice, then we're doing something wrong. Especially because this new spiritual culture that's emerging in the West, this spirituality divorced from a religious tradition, and I want to be spiritual without committing to a law-based life. I just want to commit to certain ideas that are appealing, they make me feel good. Again, it's a self-centered approach to a God-centric religion. How? Where, if anything, religion was always there for you to transcend the self and align with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So also, this is a message to everyone struggling. That doesn't mean Islam is wrong, or it doesn't mean that you should renounce your practice. In fact, this itself is the alleyway to self-refinement. This thing we talk about, discomfort, yes, it's even present in the way in which we practice. It's okay. This is how you self-refine. This is how you really contend with the nafs and discipline the nafs. This is the best thing you can do for yourself. Because in the hereafter, we always envision like hell, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just waiting to put us in hell. This great hell that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created just for you and I. Like this is how we see it. This is how we're taught about it. Our scholars, when they talk about tashassud al-a'mal, your actions in this world becoming manifest. They say that some people are going to be resurrected on the basis of their actions, and some people are going to look at themselves and be horrified. Some people are going to look and they're going to be like, mashallah, beautiful, right? Depending on who you are, you're going to be brought up in that image, and some people are going to be monstrous. And not just that, like the recompense. The Holy Quran says, on that day you will be recompensed with what you did. إِنَّمَا تُجْزَوْنَ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. I believe the ayah goes, your recompense, it's going to be what you did. So when the veil is lifted, this veil of the material world that masks the reality of things, and you're contending with the things that you did or failed to do, you're going to realize there are things that you continue to commit to that are so beautiful and rewarding in the hereafter. And there's going to be things, maybe other people are going to feel like, oh, I renounced this act and this act and this act, and now I'm feeling. Because maybe in this dunya you're not feeling it that much, or maybe the material world is distracting you from feeling the repercussions of your actions, but my recompense on that day is going to be really seeing what I did and feeling what I did. And if I wasn't someone that, committed to anything godly, if I lived just dunya, just that's my concern, I'm going to truly feel that when the veils are lifted. Mm-hmm. That's how we have to interact. So sometimes you have to zoom out 40, 50 years. I work with a lot of women And sometimes the primary, thing that they're contending with is their hijab. It's their headscarf. And I say, listen, I understand. On World Hijab Day, you have a plethora of people coming saying, I love my hijab, it's the best thing, and I love when I see that. But there are so many people struggling, and I'm saying, hey, it's okay. That's good. That's not a sign for you to remove it. If you're struggling, you're going through it. That's what religion is about. Self-refinement, really, like dusting and really cleaning the mirror of the heart. A lot of times it's going to be uncomfortable. It's okay. And there's room and space to have that dialogue, room and space to talk about it and say, listen, you're still doing great. If you're having struggles, that doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. Right? The struggle is going to fix you itself. SubhanAllah, the struggle is the medicine. Be patient, wait it out, and just remember, this body that you're having so much trouble or that you so badly want to uncover, 30, 40 years, it's going to be covered by dirt, eaten by worms. Honestly, it's ironic. But really our bodies, right now, maybe I have 50 years, I don't know. If I'm lucky 50 years, I'm going to be food for worms, right? Very soon. Zoom out a little bit. Just remember, this world is not the be-all, end-all. If it was the be-all, end-all, I say do what you want. Yeah. Enjoy it, you get one life.
Carpe diem.
Yes, carpe diem. Yeah, the movie, right? Food for worms, lads, he says. Yeah, but no, it's... zoom out a bit. Just remember, sometimes you need to coach yourself. You have to do talqeen of the heart and say, listen, heart, remember 1, remember 2, remember 3. This is where reflection is really important. You're going through this crisis, sit yourself down, say, Zahra, you're going through 1, 2, 3. How can I offer myself reminders? Have this contemplative relationship with yourself. Do a talqeen of your heart. Talk to your heart. Speak to your heart. Give it the words that it needs to remember that this world is not everything. 40, 50 years, it's done. Now you have eternity that you're going to have to live out. Act in accordance with your eternity. You are an infinite creation. Act in accordance to your infinity.
Act according to it. Yeah, subhanAllah. While you were talking about living in that discomfort and seeking the discomfort and that it's okay if it hurts or it's okay if it's uncomfortable, it reminds me of if you've ever worked out or had a trainer. What the trainer might say to you is, if it hurts, that means it's working. So it's okay if you feel discomfort, if you feel like this isn't going well or it's not comfortable, that's okay. It means it's working. It means you're working towards something.
Yes.
And it's not a sign of leaving it to be or abandoning the progress you've made up until that point. You also talked about earlier on, the fragmentation of the self. So a different approach to that would be a holistic approach, which is something that we've talked about already a little bit. And it is the approach you guys handle within the Spiritual Warrior program, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So the Spiritual Warrior program, Hussein and I, we work a lot on Mula Sadra. We've been in this philosophy course in the Hawza for about 3 years now, and our teacher is, alhamdulillah, phenomenal. This is really his area of expertise. And Mullah Sadra is one of our core philosophers in the Shia tradition. And he talks a lot about oneness and tawheed. I don't want to get too much into the oneness because, it's a way of irfan. But let's just, one of the things he speaks about is this holistic understanding of the self. So with Descartes, especially, we have this severing of this connectedness between the spirit or the soul and the body. We really see this happening with Descartes. He really cemented this separation. And so when you cement the separation between self or the spirit or the soul and the body, you get a lot of problems. Like, how do these two substances interact? From a logical framework, how can two things that have nothing essentially in common, like something that's material and something that's immaterial, have any causality between them? And you have a lot of theories that came up to answer that question, like this parallelism, and philosophers that came after, like Spinoza, they're trying to answer how can the mind or the body, whatever, how can the immaterial, some people mind, so how can it affect the body, and how vice versa. And because a lot of philosophers have had trouble with answering this question in its utmost rational truth, they went either to deny the material entirely, so you have idealism and just it's all in your mind, or to just ascertain the material only and say there's no material. Because we haven't been able to really bridge the connect between the two. Mona Sadra's approach was something that baffled me, it blew me away. Because I myself was navigating that world as well and saying, okay, how can we account for this connectedness? I saw different answers, but Mona Sadra says that the body is a station of the soul. Very interesting and a very radical judgment to make, that the body is almost an appearance of the soul. It's a station of the soul. And it's not a separate nature. It's not separated essentially. They're one thing, right? They're different stations of the soul. You have the station of the intellect, the station of the body, the station of the soul, the spirit. And they're all one thing, but different facets of this one thing. So when you say ana, me. When you introduce yourself, ana. Me, tomorrow I might lose my arm, my leg. I might go tanning. I might make all of these changes to myself. But you would still call me Zahra, right? If I lost an arm. So then what makes me? I am all of these things. So I'm still essentially there present. So you are all of these things. And one example that I like to use is, it's like water. You are that water that comes out in different faucets. So when you're looking at something and when you're speaking, this is water on one level, this is one faucet. When you're interacting with something intellectually, this is another faucet of the self. When you're interacting with something on a material level, that's one faucet. When you're interacting with something on a spiritual level, that's another faucet. But it's all one water. So if you corrupt yourself, if you introduce toxic water from the eyes, for example, something that you look upon, toxic water from the ears, something that you're listening to, like music, for example, toxic water from the spirit, and you're not praying, for example, it's impossible to divorce that from the effects that it's going to have on the human self entirely. So we have narrations that say, eating lentils soften the heart. Right? Lentils softening the heart. How does something material have anything to do with the heart and it being softened? So you have this, in hadith we have something like this that can support it, where this interconnectedness, for example, our scholars say music weakens your resolve, weakens your determination. And so now we listen, you say we listen to a song, it's okay, and it's just a song, 3 minutes, no big deal, right? I want to get my workout in, I need the music, right? So we make these justifications about why we might listen to haram music, thinking that it's just a passing thing, a passing sin, it's okay. But the idea is that sin itself is forming you in other components of your life. So that be sure that when you stand in Fajr the next morning, the repercussions of that song, it's going to show up in one way or another. Okay, and likewise, if you are not taking care of your physical body, if you are not sleeping, if you are not, for example, taking time to be in nature, interacting with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all small things, working out, small things, and here and there, if you're not focusing on the body, be sure that this faucet, this water, is going to come and maybe have a negative effect on the spirit and on the mind intellectually. So this interconnectedness, when you really see that sin is not just, it's very interesting, it's not just haram and it's haram, it's just haram. It's not going to affect me in any way, it's just haram. And that's how we interact with haram, right? This song, I'm going to listen to it, it's going to pass. It's not a big deal. We say it a lot with minor things, right?
It's something exclusive.
It's something exclusive, I just have to finish my workout, whatever, what, I won't listen to it after, whatever. Whereas the first victim of sin is not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how we see it. It's a sin, yes, we are sinning against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the victim of the sin is the self. That's the idea. Where every lie, lying, for example, the act of lying, it makes you more suspectful of other people. So it gives you anxiety. So it's like, you are the greatest victim of the things that you fail to do. And sometimes there are acts where we say like they're no big deal, they're just fine, they're passing acts. Based on this holistic approach to the nafs, know that these acts are plaguing the water, or they're making it a bit more toxic, this water of the self. And so sometimes, for example, if someone is having trouble on the level of the mind, right, with certain thoughts, maybe the approach wouldn't be to tell them to think better thoughts or positively. Maybe the approach would be seeing, are you sleeping? Are you engaging with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How are you eating? So it's not like you're tackling it on the sphere of the mind, you're going to other areas. Maybe if someone is having trouble with spirituality and connecting with God, you wouldn't say, be more wary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and pray more prayers. Maybe you would say, what's your food like? Are you gluttonous in the way that you eat? What do you think about? Sometimes we imagine haram things, like haram scenarios. What do you think about? Or not even haram. Sometimes the faculty of khayal or imagination is so strong in us that it overpowers intellect. So I engage with the world through mostly my imagination. That can be a trouble for committing to religious. So maybe you ask them about their mind, right? This is another holistic approach to the self. And this is the blueprint that Hussein and I use with our spiritual warrior program. We're developing this Islamic spiritual psychology into a roadmap because it really is something I think that psychology itself is so whitewashed. It's so desacralized, and I think it's time we draw from what we have philosophically, traditionally, hadith, narrations, Quran, and create a blueprint for this up and coming generation that's having so much trouble with their mind, their body, and their soul. SubhanAllah, so like this merging. So this holistic approach actually is informed by one of Sadra's, wahda of the nafs that he speaks about, that we found it extremely effective in kind of treating the person in their holistic being and their whole oneness by harmonizing the different facets of the self to tackle whatever issue it is that we're going through on any facet.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, beautifully explained. Thank you so much. And I'm loving that you guys are now, for a few years already, have started the Spiritual Warrior program where you tackle it by the holistic approach, where you try to help others through the program with that holistic approach. For people interested, they can visit the website as well, right? It's spiritualwarrior.com.
I believe it's swproject.com. I'm not sure, but Spiritual Warrior Project, you can just type it on Google, you'll have our Instagram, you'll have everything else.
Yes.
It's a motion from fragmentation, from compartmentalizing the self to a holistic wellness, inshallah.
Yes. As well. Anyone interested could Google it and read more upon it. I see that we've reached the end of this podcast. Unfortunately, I would like to thank you for being here, for engaging with me. Thank you very much, and I hope inshallah we'll be able to welcome you many times more here at Noor Association.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. And with that, I would like to end the Thank you, dear viewers, for listening and tuning in with us. Make sure to rewatch all of our other podcast episodes and tune in for the next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.